Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to go through different styles or traditions of Vedic astrology, also known as Jyotish. If you're interested, this is kind of in the category of history, philosophy videos that I do on the subject of Jyotish, Vedic astrology. If you're looking for more of this type of stuff, content, I would check my history philosophy playlist. There I have already Vedic astrology in the Vedas, and the 6 limbs are Sadanga Vedic astrology, so you can check those out. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Jyotish, and most of them are on actually interpreting birth charts and that sort of thing. They're all in my concepts playlist, so if you find my playlist, you'll be able to, I think, more easily find videos, so you can check those out. All right, so we're talking about methods, not methods, but styles or traditions of Jyotish. And before I get into specific traditions of Jyotish, I was going to mention that there's actually kind of integrated methods of doing Jyotish. So besides just looking at charts, for example, so there are 3 main kind of additional sciences that can be integrated with Jyotish to come up with a reading. Okay, and so the first is the Sankhya Shastra, which is essentially numerology. So there are Jyotishis who can use like the date of your birth, for example, and that weaves somehow into their Jyotish interpretation for you. There's also Samudrika Shastra, and this is divination through body parts, so different body parts, and I don't do this, so I'm not exactly sure, but like maybe an ear, maybe a hand, maybe a toe, but different size and markings and colors and that sort of thing can be used to, again, integrate that into a chart interpretation to give a full result or full interpretation, integrated interpretation. And then there's Hasta Samudrika, which most people will probably be the most familiar with, and this is essentially palmistry. And this is considered basically a branch of Samudrika Shastra. So I have just a tiny bit of knowledge of Hasta Samudrika, very basic. I'm not an expert in this, but there are people who can read hands and determine a lot of good things, so it's can be pretty amazing. Okay, so styles, traditions of Jyotish. Just to give a little bit of kind of background before we get into the specific styles or traditions. Each tradition, major tradition of Jyotish, started with some famous historical figure who wrote or supposedly wrote an important text. And again, because some of these texts are written thousands of years ago, or at least hundreds of years ago, the history is sketchy or at least vague or not quite, known all the time. Yeah. The other thing is that students are generally taught to be differential to these original teachings, these books that were written years ago. So that's pretty, I think, strong in any lineage of Jyotish. But really, the lineage begins, from a kind of a divine inspiration, and the divine inspiration related to Jyotish is called the Jyotirvidya. I kind of think of the Jyotirvidya as like the spirit of Jyotish. And this is some, I don't know, in my mind, great intelligence, definitely greater than my own, kind of protective spirit in a way, maybe the guardian of the tradition of Jyotish, the primary tradition of Jyotish. And when somebody kind of gets when the Jyotirvidya grabs them or possesses them, that sounds a little more, I don't know, intense. But when somebody's sort of caught in the I don't know, the fire of Jyotish again, they become an embodiment through their own consciousness. Some people might call this channeling. I don't know. Could be, maybe. I don't know. I guess I'm not familiar enough with that. But so what happens is, once again, somebody's sort of touched. Maybe that's a lighter way of saying possess. Possess sounds like there's no control. It can be a little sinister if you watch like different kinds of movies and stuff. But if somebody's touched by the spirit of Jyotish, the Jyotirvidya, they can start to embody the principles of this art and science. Okay, now it's you can kind of think of the traditions of Jyotish as being like this river with different branches. So sometimes the branches kind of weave back in and on themselves. Yeah. So and the path is not always linear. And sometimes, again, different branches of rivers meet up again and create larger riverbeds and things like that. So, yeah. So these principles of Jyotish, they expand over generations. You know, they pass through generations of students, sometimes families, and these principles expand over generations by, again, other people who are sort of touched by this Jyotirvidya spirit and who are also engaged in seeing the light, because essentially that's a translation of Jyotish is somebody who studies light. And that's what we're studying, is light from the stars and light from the planets and the sun and the moon and, you know, that sort of thing. So a seer is somebody is considered to be kind of a bridge between heaven and earth, or the sky and the earth. And their sacred duty is to maintain the bonds of knowledge, the Jyotish knowledge, with the sacred origins. Right. And so most, sincere Jyotishis will regard themselves as custodians of this lineage. So there are people who know Jyotish and can use it in self-serving ways, perhaps, more than as a pure gift, that they've been offered, and they sincerely pass on to people. And, I think, I don't know. I mean, I've seen Jyotishis, astrologers, and I tend to watch a lot of tarot card readers and that sort of thing. And there are definitely people who know a lot. But I think you do have to be mindful, if not careful, of the person who's doing the interpretation. Because if they're not entirely sincere, I think that can taint the interpretation of the reading. And I think also that it can taint the relationship between the astrologer and the client. And it's because, again, when somebody is kind of going off the rails of trying to maintain this in a sincere way, not that they have to be completely rigid about it, I don't think, because, again, everything is going through a process of evolution. But if they don't respect the tradition and respect the practice, then there is this kind of negative residue that I think infiltrates the practice and the interaction and the interpretation, because essentially that bit that's tainted is coming from some negative aspect or maybe egoic aspect of the person that's not entirely cleared up. And who knows, I don't know how many of us, I can't say for myself if I'm 100% clear, but at least I aspire to be. So that the information and the interpretation is just sort of running through me without my own personal limitations blocking the flow, essentially. So again, a bit of background. And this last quote here, this comes from Maharishi Parashara, who's considered by many to be the father of Jyotish. This is at the end of the Brihat Parashara Hora, which is the main text that he wrote. That is the main text of the main branch or tradition of Jyotish, so it's kind of a big deal. At the end of this book, he writes, "This knowledge I have imparted to you is that same science of Jyotish that Lord Brahma, the creator, spoke to Narada, the divine messenger, and that Narada spoke to Shaunaka and other sages, from whom I received it. I have narrated it to you as I learnt it from them." So, again, just within that, there's this, I think, respect to the tradition, respect to the teachers, as well as a humility in terms of just being another branch, another, tributary of this ongoing river of knowledge that, if you're lucky enough to be an astrologer, you can touch or be a part of, and again, hopefully maintain and with integrity. Yeah. All right, so let's get into the actual styles and traditions of Jyotish. So there are 5 main traditions. The first I'm going to talk about is the Nadi tradition. The origin, time origin of this tradition is not known. And this is a pretty unique form of Jyotish. So Nadi is essentially at this point a library of horoscopes of people who had not been born when they were written down. And the horoscopes were written down on palm leaves centuries ago by Indian sages who basically, since they're seers, they could sit in meditation and download horoscopes from people who had not been born yet. All right. So again, there's a whole library of these, and apparently there was a bigger library of these at some point, and there was a great fire that destroyed most of it. But what remains of the library gets passed through families. And so the collections that are remaining are only of those people who are destined to consult with their horoscope, this horoscope, okay? So the source text, the big written text on the style of Jyotish are the Agastya Nadi, the Parashara Nadi, the Bhrigu Nadi, the Chandra Nadi, and the Shuka Nadi. Okay, so in this style of Jyotish, there are 4 steps in a reading that will be covered. So the first step is the Bhava Phala, which are personal issues, things like career, marriage, health, that sort of thing. Then there's the Yoga Kanda, which is mundane predictions, and this kind of gives a prediction of the social or political milieu that's occurring at the time that somebody is, living their life. Then there's the Karma Kanda, and this is actually reveals details of a previous life, and usually this means misdeeds or things that were done in previous lives that are creating obstructions in the current life. And then there's the Shanti Kanda, which essentially means upaya, which means remedial measures. So different kinds of measures that one can do to help to ameliorate the negative effects of misdeeds from previous lives or even this life. Okay. And a note from, again, my teachers is that this type of Jyotish tends to be a bit better at describing what one has already experienced instead of predicting the future. So if you show up and you're 35 years old, your horoscope, if you have one in this library, will say things like, oh, you've gone through this level of education, or you're this kind of career, or you've been married, or the marriage is no longer for various reasons, or you have a certain amount of kids and that sort of thing. But it would not, when you show up as a 35-year-old, it would not necessarily be so helpful in determining what your life is going to be like when you're 50 or 60 or something like that. All right, so that's Nadi Jyotish. Okay, so then the second style of Jyotish is the Parashara system, or style tradition. This is the most popular and widely used style of Jyotish in India. This is the style that I use and I was taught. It's not known exactly when the current version of this system was solidified. So where in history, we kind of came up with what we do now. And which parts of today's version of the system are original to him, the Parashara, who wrote a book, the main book on Jyotish. So it's not known also if Parashara came before or after another great Jyotishi named Varahamira. Varahamira served Emperor Chandragupta II in approximately the 4th century AD. Varamahira was a prodigious author who wrote the Brihad Jataka, which is on natal astrology, and the Brihad Samhita, which is on various forms of divination. And so we don't really know how much one influenced the other. But the thing is that this Varamahira person or personage does not have an independent system of Jyotish that exists. So, or at least not now. Maybe there was, and it, kind of ran out of, followers or something. Who knows? Or got burned in the ashes. Who knows what happened through history? But at least today, there is not an independent system of Varamahira's work. And so again, there does seem to be some overlap and some influence, but to what extent, it's not known. So the main book of the Parashara system, and the main book considered for all of Jyotish, because this is the main system of Jyotish practice at this time, is the Brihat Parashara Hora, written by Parashara. And again, it's the primary work. There's like 97 chapters on Jyotish, 2,000 verses. Other important works in this style or tradition of Jyotish are the Phaladipika by Mantrasvara, Saravali by Kalyana Varma, Uttara Kalamitra by Kalidasa, and the Jataka Parijata. So, again, this is the main style used today. The third style is the Jaimini style. Jaimini was a great Vedic seer. There's only a minority of Jyotishis who practice this style today. It seems that there were some concepts that were taken from the Parashara system and developed, but they've developed so much that they don't resemble the original Parashara system anymore. So, again, they've evolved so much and from the original that they're considered more Jaimini rather than Parashara at this point. And there's some parts of Jaimini that potentially were incorporated in the Parashara system. So again, which one influenced the other more or when, a bit unclear. But most of the system is completely independent. It's possible that someone developed Jaimini as a branch from Parashara, the Parashara system, and that when they wrote their book, they ascribed a famous author to gain acceptance of the system. And that was actually often done. So in the last slide, I talked about Kalidasa writing a book. So when the book written by Kalidasa was written, there was a famous Jyotishi Kalidasa, and there was also a famous poet named Kalidasa. And so it's not clear whether the person who wrote the book is the Jyotishi, or the Jyotishi is actually also the poet. So some people, I guess, know about this stuff or are working on the history of all this stuff and the development. It's possible that some parts of Jaimini, so not only is it possible that Jaimini took a few of the concepts from the Parashara system and developed them, but it's also possible that parts of Jaimini that were similar to Parashara were added or incorporated into the BPH, the main text of the Parashara system. So again, the exact historical development relationship is unclear between Jaimini and the Parashara system. The main source text for this tradition is the Jaimini Sutras, which is, again, foundational for this style. Then the fourth type here, this is the Tajika system, also known as the Nilakanta Tajika, and the reason why is because Nilakanta Daivajna was the main proponent of this style. And Nilakanta wrote a book in 1587 AD, and so relatively speaking, the Tajika system is relatively young compared to the other styles of Jyotish. And the thing is that its history is a bit different. The Tajika system was introduced by Arabs or Persians from the Middle East, and actually Tajika in Sanskrit means Arab. Yeah, so when there was a migration of Arabic culture and influence through northern India, they brought some ideas of actually Western astrology to India, and then some of those Western ideas got incorporated into an Indian style of Jyotish. Okay, so this is a deeply Indian system, but again, there's some, if you're a Western astrologer, you might think, oh, that sounds like what I do, that sort of thing. Because again, the Arabic influence, had a proximity to Greece, and so there's some similarity. So things like the concepts of sextiles and squares and trines, so different positional relationships of planets and that sort of thing, actually are similar in the system to the Western system. So the main and so there are some people who practice this style of Jyotish, but the main contribution of the style of Jyotish to all of Jyotish is that they do what's called Varshapala technique. And what that means is they analyze a solar return. So when your sun gets back to exactly the same degree minute of when you were born, that will give you a chart for the upcoming year. So it's almost like a birthday chart that you can do. And that the technique of that is entirely Tajika, yeah. So there is a source text for this tradition as well. It's called a Nilakantha Tajika, and it's by Nilakantha. So that's the fourth one. Okay, and then the fifth style or tradition of Jyotish, the last one here, it's Tantric Jyotish, and this one's kind of the wild child of the bunch, from what I can tell. I don't practice it, but you know, again, you can, as I describe it, you'll see it's quite a bit different from the others. The origin unknown, much like the others. It's thought that this might be an offshoot of the Artava Veda, which is the fourth of the Vedas, probably the oldest scriptural texts in Indian culture. So this style of Jyotish is much more mystical and intuitive. So it's actually heavily dependent on different kinds of spiritual and intuitive training and rituals. And so the thing is, the interpretation of horoscopes is mainly derived from something internal rather than external. This can involve things like interpreting omens, observing breathing patterns of self or client, observing speech or actions from the client. There are different, again, practices and rituals encouraging visions and astral travel. Some people who practice this find that they can connect with ethereal beings and deliver messages. There can be use of substances and other techniques to induce paranormal or psychic experiences. There can be past life readings, charming of objects and people, intense spiritual practices to gain control of nature. So I don't know, again, for me, this is pretty far out. And it seems like if there's no, again, actually a little bit scary potentially. Especially if somebody is, this gets back to the first slide in terms of, somebody doing this sincerely or not. Because again, I think there might be a fine line between somebody who's truly intuitive, and I do believe there are people who are like that, but people who might be, there can be a lot of smoke and mirrors, I guess I would say here. So if you go down this road, tread carefully. Make sure you're working with somebody who's legitimate in their practice. And sometimes too, like you might, I think this practice, because there's no external, validation or sort of checks and balances system, the reading or interpretation could go off the rails. The other thing is the person, I think, could go off the rails if they're using substances and stuff to, induce psychic experiences and stuff like that. I don't know. Again, I've just seen some practitioners, not necessarily this style, but of different sort of, again, divination type work. Again, tarot card readers for some reason keeps coming to mind, but I've seen a few that, again, they seem like they're quite insightful and quite deep in their, understanding of, at least in that world, cards and stuff like that, and the symbols. But sometimes you just, I don't know, I just start to get some kind of weird, icky vibe. It's hard to describe. Where I'm just like, I'm not exactly sure where this particular person is coming from. Like one person I was watching, they were talking about they're really into like ayahuasca, which, some people are into, but I haven't gone deep down, far down that road, but just like learning about it a little bit. I don't know. I was just really kind of, I think there's some dark energies involved there. So I don't know how somebody traverses that sort of deep, dark world and comes back without, more purified versus not. I guess I don't know how that works. So, but I'm sure some people do it really well and they're brilliant at it. So, and there's like another person too. I think that's the other thing to consider, again, if you're thinking about working with an astrologer, whatever type, tantric or whatever type, There's another woman. She seemed like, yeah, I was watching her tarot card readings, and she seemed particularly insightful. But then after a while, again, I just started getting this weird vibe from her readings. And then, it just seemed, and she shared a bit of her personal story, and she seemed, on some levels, like unhealed. Like she had revealed that she was, suicidal at some point. And again, that's neither here nor there. I mean, that alone is not, I think, an issue potentially, but whatever brought them to the state of maybe considering that, if that's not healed, then that energy's still lingering somewhere in their consciousness, if that makes sense. So anyway, again, if you go down this road, just look out, because it's a wild and woolly world, as you can see from the description here. So again, a lot of intense spiritual practices to gain control of nature. Again, that, I literally lifted that text from a book, and gain control of nature. I don't know, to me already, it's sort of like, that's a little bit egoic. Work in harmony with nature, just even, description like that, but there's still this, if you're working with nature versus gaining control of nature, that's a whole different kind of relationship with nature, where you respect and allow and, again, weave together, as opposed to try to dominate the forces of destiny or something. Like, anyway, yeah, so you can see it's like it can be quite deep and, hopefully clear, but maybe convoluted. Anyway, all of these practices, spiritual practices or whatnot, they're done within a Jyotish framework. So at least that gives some structure to these shamanic practices that are done. And so just an example of that. So if there's an interpretation of omens, then where that omen happens in time and place will help determine the interpretation. So if the omen occurs in a westerly direction, then the Tantric practitioner will consider Saturn or Shani, because Saturn rules the western direction. The symbolism of Shani and the implications of Shani will be incorporated into the interpretation. Okay, there's some other far out stuff that can happen here. Again, I'm not directly privy to, but from what I hear, so another example that this tantric style can lead to is that apparently one of these practitioners can examine a horoscope and determine whether someone can gain control of spirits. So again, already, I kind of get in defense mode when I hear things like that. Again, maybe it's just the language. Even if the language was communicate with spirits, I mean, I'm sure there are people who do that, but gain control of them, that's a whole other thing in my mind. So maybe I'm just being picky with the language here, but so by looking at your horoscope, they can determine whether you have the ability to, let's say, communicate with spirits, because it's just easier for me to say and maybe believe. But if so, if there is the ability destined in the chart, what kind of spirits one can commune with. So I don't know about different classes of spirits. I don't know if that's like family or friends or other people's loved ones, or who that might be. I don't know how that works. Whether you'll be successful in this, and I don't know how they define success. Like, I don't know if it's just the communication part or the translation of the messages from the spirits to the client. I don't know what that success means or is defined, how it's defined. And then also the precise moment at which you should begin rituals in order to succeed at this craft. So, yeah, pretty far out. More than the others, I think. But again, I don't have enough knowledge or experience to say much about this, but again, just within myself, I'm like, oh, okay, because this is pretty far out, and I've known just astrology practitioners, even in the main kind of system, the Parashara system, who they said or did this, something or other. And I was just like, even though they had a lot of training and experience, there was still something that happened that, again, kind of alerted me to maybe there were issues on some level of integrity with trying to communicate, or why they were communicating, or the motivation, and how they were going about interpretations and things like that. So again, you definitely want to, always watch out for yourself, right? Don't give over or acquiesce your own authority, your own judgment, your own thoughts and things like that, because people can take advantage of it. So, yeah, so there you go. 5 different styles, traditions of Jyotish. So thank you for your time. I always appreciate you stopping by and listening to one of my talks, and I appreciate your support for the channel. Again, all of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are in my concepts playlist. I do offer individual birth chart readings on Zoom, so if that's of interest, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com for more information. I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine, and that includes other Vedic arts such as Ayurveda and yoga, as well as other paradigms of medicine like Homeopathy and Naturopathic Medicine. The name of that channel is Nature Source Care. As always, I hope you found this interesting and useful. And again, these more history, philosophical type talks are really just to provide more context. I know people get sort of mesmerized by the chart interpretation, all that kind of stuff, but I think it's important to stay grounded in the tradition. And again, the integrity and the spirit of the practice. So until the next one, take care. Namaste.